Well, let's take a look at our document camera. Today we're going to finish up our stuff about writing. This is the stuff that we're going to use in our homework, Chapter 6 homework, which will be due this week, whatever, by Friday probably. This is building better sentences, becoming a better writer, structural aids, 6.3 essentially is what this is. And the homework for this chapter is all about writing better sentences, starting with the sentence that needs to be fixed and fixing it. And after we go through these things, we'll essentially be done. It's just 6.3 and then we're done. So let's take a look at it. Let's zoom in real quick. We're just going to go through a bunch of these different things that they talk about on how to write cleanly and more concisely and so on and so forth. So, how many of these are there? There's 15 to 14, 15 of these things. And then we've got, on punctuation, we've got 8 things. Word demons, we've got 15 things. And then we'll skip the equation stuff and we'll go on to subject-verb agreement, a little bit, miscellaneous issues. We're just going to cover a lot of stuff. This is stuff you've done in English before. But what I want you to remember is that when we're doing this in engineering, when we talk about writing in engineering, it's a little bit different. We're not going to be quite the same. We've discussed that before, so let's take a look at it. The first thing is using parallel construction. When you're comparing related ideas, use similar sentence structure or construction, right? So they have 2 examples. The incorrect version, scientists acquire knowledge and engineers are concerned with applying knowledge, right? The correct way to do that would be scientists are concerned with acquiring knowledge, comma, whereas engineers are concerned with applying knowledge, right? 2 very direct sentences. We have a connector. It's connected with the whereas word and a comma, right? You can do the same thing with lists. You have an incorrect way of making a list. Civil engineers build roads, building construction, and waterworks planning. But the second and third thing in here they're not using the same structure. Civil engineers build roads essentially means that they're using this tense that this is what they do right now, right? And going into the second part, building construction is not a tense, right? It's a description of, it's more of a noun description instead of a verb and a something they do, right? So civil engineers build roads, they construct buildings, they plan waterworks. It's all the same kind of stuff. And they do this again and again, just lots of different examples of things to do, things not to do. Avoid sentence fragments. Right? You don't want to have a sentence that's incomplete. They give you a correct and incorrect. Clear pronoun references. So make sure that if you're using a pronoun, which is a he, this, that, it, whatever, that it actually refers to something that is obvious, right? So lots of different ways to do that. They give you examples. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the examples. You can look through them as you do your homework and as you learn how to do this stuff. But I just want to point out the kind of things that we need to be aware of when we're writing and when you're learning this stuff in English. Avoid long sentences. Really important. I've seen this already in several papers written in this class. We have a long sentence. The procedure for operating the chemical reactor starts by first opening valve A by turning the handle counterclockwise when viewed from the top, comma, then turning pump A and waiting 15 minutes while simultaneously watching the temperature gauge does not overheat, comma, in which case open valve B, comma, which introduces cooling water to cool the reactor. That is such a long, overrun sentence. It's just, you can't follow it. You should never make lists within sentences, for example, in engineering. If you're making a long list of things, procedures, components, whatever, it should never be in a sentence form. You should break it into a list form. You say, these are the things that you should do in the following order, and then break out of the sentence Put a colon on the end and put a 1. Do this. 2. Do this. 3. Do this. Or you could break it up into several sentences. I still don't like that form, but whatever. And you want to avoid really short sentences as well. First, open valve A. Not a really good sentence, right? If you're going to do that, put it into a list that's actually formatted as a list, a vertical list. Using active voice, number 6 is quite important. Temperature is dependent upon the heat input, or temperature depends on the heat input. Temperature depends uses a verb instead of the verb is. It uses the actual action verb. So here it's temperature is dependent, or temperature depends, right? Why is this important? Well, because it makes the sentence shorter. It's a huge difference, and it's also more clear and more concise. It's just very direct. Avoid vague words, right? For example, here they say they have the sensor reads 150 degrees when you should say the thermometer or the heat sensor or whatever. Use something that is much more correct, much more has all the details that you need so that you know exactly what you're talking about. Don't use vague phrases, vague words. Reduce the number of prepositions. You don't want to use lots of ofs, ins, bys, ons, outs, all this kind of stuff, right? They talk about how to cut down on that. Redundancies, right? The pH value was 7.2, or the pH was 7.2. Redundancies are essentially words that are not necessary to get the point across, right? They're extra words, or they're just stuff, right? We don't need extra stuff. Bureaucratic language is another one that engineers hate, right? And this one is a biggie because when you're learning how to write, especially in high school and college, you want to sound like you know, like you're growing older or you're more mature or something like this. And so you want to say things like by means of, in the event of, with regard to, but you could just use a very simple word. By, if, because, about, you know, very, very quick, very easy. You also want to avoid informal voice. Informal words and informal voice. So in mathematics, we often talk about plugging numbers into an equation. You don't want to do that. You want to substitute numbers into an equation. That is the proper mathematical term, right? You don't want to use words like can't or won't or isn't. You know, you want to use the proper word. Do not use contractions. Also, don't use words that are just fancy. You know, don't use words that are just to make somebody think that you know more words than you do, or you sound smart, right? They have a whole list of words that sound smart and words that aren't. You want to avoid any kind of sexist language. Don't use any kind of thing like that. Sexist language does not necessarily include he or she. That's not what it is. But you definitely don't want to use anything that is demeaning to either sex or assumes something about one sex or the other. They have dangling modifiers here. They give all kinds of incorrect and correct versions of sentences for dangling modifiers, and that's fine. I know a lot of people are really big on that. I'm not all that big. Split infinitives. Again, this is something that is not, I don't see this as much, but you see it sometimes. For example, you have this one sentence, Eddie decided to quickly drive down the road, or Eddie decided to drive quickly down the road. The second one is actually the preferred method, but it's not, you don't see this mistake made very often, so I won't worry about it too much, but you should know about it. You just need to have a sentence that is straightforward, so you don't have these modifiers that come before the actual the actual action verb of the sentence, right? It's kind of like speaking like Yoda. Okay, with punctuation, there are just tons and tons of examples of how not to and how to use punctuation. All I want to do is go through and talk about the different kinds of punctuation you need to be aware of, how to use correctly. I'm not going to go through the correct use of them. There are thousands of different ways to correctly and incorrectly use them. You need to look that up when the time comes. But the things you need to be aware of: hyphens, right? Hyphens, colons, and semicolons, right? Commas. You should know how to use these things. Parentheses, dashes, semicolons, which I already mentioned, apostrophes, quotation marks. These two are huge. So many people misuse both apostrophes and quotation marks. So be aware of how to use those things. You could also understand how to use underlined words. Words that are in a different font, changing the font of words. Other things like that. Okay. This next section is kind of interesting because it has essentially to do with words that are often used improperly in the English language because they have synonyms or other things about them that are funky. For example, the plurality of words are sometimes funny. One of the big ones is the word effect, and affect, right? That one that's a big one. Read these different definitions and look at how they're spelled. Excuse me. One is a noun, two are verbs, in other words. Complement and complement, right? Complement and complement. And the reason that that's important is because we often use the word complement in engineering. We're actually on this page, sorry. We actually often use this second one in engineering quite a bit, but not the first one. But you would not believe how many engineers actually misspell it and spell it complement, which means to praise somebody, right? We have continuous and continual. Different things. They mean completely different things. Right? Continuous means it always happens and it never stops happening. Continual means that it happens and then it happens again and then it happens again. And there could be pauses in between. Right? Continuous means that it never stops happening. Data. Data means multiple pieces of information. Datum means one piece of information. Fewer and less. This in math, there's a lot of words in math that have very specific meanings, and these two words do have specific meanings. When you're dealing with integers, the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, -1, -2, -3, -4, you use the word fewer. When you use less, that is all the real numbers, or things that cannot be counted. Farther and further, right? Farther actually has something to do with distance. Further does not have anything to do with distance. Okay? We have these two abbreviations in Latin, IE and EG, right? IE means that is to say. So in other words, you're talking about something and it's maybe not obvious what you're trying to get at. So you use IE. EG is you're talking about something and you want to give an example of what you're explaining. So that's for example, EG. Those things are confused way too long. Principle, principle, and principle, right? A noun and two nouns and an adjective, and they mean three different things. The thing is that we often use the first two and even the last one, actually. We actually use all three of these in engineering quite a bit. But we need to keep them spelled correctly. We need to use the right spelling in the right place. Contractions of the word it's, right? It is and the possessive form of it. There, and there. You've probably dealt with that one before, right? Words that you use in the middle of sentences. That and which, for example, right? One of them is restrictive, one of them is non-restrictive. To lose something and to loose something, or to loosen something. Something that is loose and something that you lose. Often misplaced, misused, misspelled. Two words that are often substituted for each other that should not be substituted for each other. Since and because, right? Because is something that is the cause of something else. Since is a time word. It's a word that's used from a time in the past until now. That's what they say in the definition, right? So we often misuse the word since. Since I got an A on my exam, I got an A on my test, right? That's a cause-effect thing, not a time thing. So it should be used because I got an A on my test, or I got an A on my test. I got an A in my class because I got an A on the exam. Would be the proper way. Yes. We have while and whereas, respectively and respectfully, different words that are used all the time improperly, and there are hundreds more. 6.3.7, they talk about equations, and we're not going to deal with that really. That's something that you'll learn later in much more detail. 6.3.8, subject-verb agreement. Again, you've learned this in English, where the subject of your sentence should agree with the verbs. In other words, the person that you're talking about in the sentence should be doing the thing that you're talking about in the sentence, and it should be agreeing in the tense that you use. So she does something, they do something, for example. Those are verb agreements, right? Verb and subject agreements. Those things should all connect in the tenses and in the actual meaning of the sentence. Then they have a whole bunch of miscellaneous issues here. Bunch of these miscellaneous issues involve verb tense. For the first person, you should not use the first person when you're writing formally. And most engineering writing is formal writing. So we studied the combustion of methane. Should not be the way you write it. You say the combustion of methane was studied, or something else. Capitalization, right? You capitalize proper nouns, you capitalize at the beginning of sentences, but you not capitalize other things. For example, titles. You don't capitalize mechanical engineer. You don't entitle president necessarily. That you do entitle president because that is the proper noun, because it's the title of a person. So titles of persons are capitalized if that is their actual title. But only if it's part of their name. If you say somebody is the president of the company in the previous example, you don't put it as a title. So proper and improper nouns, you have to understand. Titles of things in a paper, of books, and of things within a paper. So if a paper has chapters, and chapter 1 is the name of a chapter, you should entitle it, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of rules for that, and you need to be aware of them. You don't necessarily need to know them all. You need to be aware that there are rules, and you should try to learn them when you need them. Italics, that's another one of those things for different fonts, right? Foreign words employed in English sentences, scientific names of organizations, defined words, long publications. So in English class, they often tell you to always underline the title of a book or a publication. In engineering, you actually put it in italics. Articles, they talk about using the word the, using the word it, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's just lots of different things you can talk about. Figures and tables, when you're talking about a figure, it should be capitalized. It should be also referenced. They talk about doing lists, they talk about spelling. References, here's just something that's different probably than most things you've ever learned when you're doing references in engineering. We use a fairly simple form of referencing things, but you can actually use different ways to do it in different publications. So here's the same reference done in two different ways. And they're both acceptable, except one publication may prefer one may prefer the other. And so references just need to include the basic information that needs to be done cleanly so that everybody understands what it is. And if you're writing for some particular publication, you need to make sure you know what they expect. So chapter 6.3 is essentially all the stuff that you're going to look up while you're doing your homework. You're going to have all these sentences, A through Q, I guess, or A through double I. I gave you number 1, right? What number did I give you on the homework? Number 1 and 2? Probably. But you're going to go through and you're going to look at this sentence. You're going to try to simplify it. You're going to minimize it, minimize extra words being used. You're going to reform the sentence so it is more clear. And you're going to try to do this as much as possible. Try to make the sentence as clear as possible, and it gives all the information that the original sentence did, but in the clearest, most concise, most direct manner, using all the different tools that you can use of good writing in section 6.3. And that's all we have for you. This is the end of chapter 6. We're going to finish writing that, and then we're going to go on to our next project, which is the trebuchet project, or catapult, or something like that. It's like a catapult, but we're going to do a trebuchet project. And at the end of the trebuchet project, we're going to use these skills, these writing skills, to write our project report and to give a project, project presentation. That's the word I'm looking for. So, trebuchet project is going to include some of this stuff from chapter 6. So, you have your homework. You have a lot of sentences to work on for your homework. If you want any help with any of those sentences, please send me an email. You can show me what you've done, and I can give you some pointers, give you some feedback. More than more than willing to help out, and you're more than welcome to ask. You can also go to an English teacher or a science teacher or some other teacher, some other person, anybody really, and ask and show them your work. It's very important to show people your writing so that you can get lots of input and lots of ideas on how to improve it. Everybody's writing can always improve, and it's an important thing. So I'm going to let you guys go. You have time today to work on your homework for chapter 6, and we will see you guys on Friday.
It's kind of hard to tell how long my papers are. I don't actually have Word on my computer. I use WordPad, and it doesn't do individual pages.